And Dame Jane Goodall, known for her groundbreaking studies involving chimpanzees, has died aged 91. A post on her Facebook page says she died this morning from natural causes while in California on a speaking tour. In the city, the FTSE 100's closed up 96 points at 94.46. The pound buys $1.34 and €1.14. LBC weather, a dry evening for many. Rain lingering in northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, lows of 6 degrees. From Global's newsroom, for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Wednesday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. It's 2 minutes past 8. Let me introduce my panel. To my left, Jessica Harrington, family law barrister, former Conservative MP. Next to her, making his debut on the programme, Sebastian Salek, who is a Labour councillor in Waltham Forest in North East London and former political journalist. To my right, also making her debut, Rachel Millward, who's one of two deputy leaders of the Green Party of England and Wales and the co-leader of Wealden District Council in East Sussex. And next to her is Tom Scottson, political reporter for the Politics Home website, who I first got to know, 3 or 4 years ago when you interviewed me for a podcast in Manchester.
Yeah, I replied to your email, Ian. I remember, and I was delighted. I was jumping out of my skin, and then you asked to come down and help produce for you.
Welcome. Now, we've got lots to talk about. I'm sure you've got some fantastic questions to put to our panel. The usual numbers apply, 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp us on that number as well, or you can text 84850. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player and the LBC app. And if you ever miss an episode of Cross Question, you can always catch up on Global Player and the LBC app, or indeed the LBC YouTube channel if you'd like to see us in vision as well.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first question. It's a text question from Evan in West Wales. Following the PM's buoyant speech this week, that's one word for it, and Andy Burnham's leadership threat seemingly simmering down, for now at least, given the next general election is a few years out, has Nigel Farage peaked too soon? I find that an interesting question because I wrote an article in the Telegraph last week saying exactly that, or at least asking the question. Jessica, let's come to you first. Given that the other three are all debutants, we'll let you go first.
Start with a bit of experience.
Exactly.
Has Nigel Farage peaked too soon? I'd like to think I hope so. But let's face it, a week is a long time in politics. Let's go back just 1 week. We had, the Prime Minister fighting for his political future in the background of winning a general election the year before. We had Andy Burnham on the march, just going too far ahead with his chess moves, hadn't even got himself started on the board. But anyway, that's petered out. I would say, yes, I think that is really possible about Nigel Farage. He has peaked. And I think that the response by him and Reform today, the toys out the pram, the very sort of on the back foot messaging, stamping of foot and so on. To me, that I think that shows that they, for the first time, they are having to do some of the running.
Well, given that we haven't got a Reform UK spokesperson on the panel tonight, let me play devil's advocate on that, because I think if I was Nigel Farage, I would have taken great exception to being likened to somebody who was supporting the Hitler Youth, but which is what David Lammy said and then backtracked on it very quickly. I think if you're accused of that sort of thing, you are going to throw your toys out of the pram.
I think the difficulty that Nigel Farage has, I just think there is a lack of sympathy across the board for him if he's now going to start saying that people in glass houses, shouldn't throw stones. I just think he is successful in many ways in politics. We've all seen that. We've witnessed changes across this country with him and his role at the centre of that, actually, over the last 10 years now in particular. But I'm afraid when it comes to use of language, when it comes to getting down and discussing the issues at heart, I think that it plays very poorly for him to now look affronted and disappointed and angry.
So basically you think he's brought it on himself?
I do think he's brought it on himself. I think And my concern with all of that is that there are such important topics, which I accept he's taken the front foot on in the national political arena in many ways. I don't think he's got the answers, but that's for another day. But what concerns me about that is then when other people try to respond, his behaviour. I think that the language and the response today, I thought it was, to say the least, disappointing. I think it was quite childish, some of it, and what I mean by that is for somebody in reform to go on the radio and say, well, I'm not going to scaremonger about security matters, but just so you know, our party leader's security has been reduced. Now, whether or not any of that is right, if you're that concerned, well, no, fine. But the point is, I just think that is then playing a sort of, we're scared, we're vulnerable card. And I just don't think that they're in a position to do that.
OK. Sebastian?
It's a double standard, isn't it? This is a man who said that Brexit had been won without a shot being fired. The week before, we'd had an MP murdered. This is a man who spent the whole of summer rubbing his hands saying, God, wouldn't it be terrible if we had any kind of rioting again this summer? And now he's calling out Farage for simply stating what a lot of people really think is true. This is a mainstream view. I saw some polling on this. 46% of people, according to YouGov, think that reform policies are generally racist. So it wasn't an extreme view. I think it was just Starmer speaking on behalf of a large part of the British population.
But is this what we've got for the next 4 years of sort of this constant toing and froing? Because it's not... I heard someone today call it not very edifying, and I thought that was a really good way of describing it. I mean, OK, you can have robust political debate, but when it stoops to this kind of level, and whether you blame Farage for it or whether you blame Starmer for it, to the outside world, I think a lot of people just switch off from it.
I think it's important to call out extremism when it's expressed. We are talking here about mass deportations of people who live here legally. These are our friends, these are our neighbours, these are the people we interact with at work. I'm really pleased that we've got a Prime Minister who is putting his foot down and creating a real dividing line between lots of very sensible people in this country and Reform, who I think have overshot it on this one.
Do you not think, though, that this whole strategy of sort of flying the flag, everything's about patriotism now, it could turn out to be a really big strategic error? Because if you fight on your enemy's territory, whether it's a military campaign or in politics, that rarely works.
But that's exactly the problem. Patriotism should not be the domain of the far right. It should be for all of us. We should all have a right to feel proud and excited about where we live. The problem is on the left. We haven't talked about that for too long. We've let that be co-opted by other people. And I'm pleased to see that conversation is coming back and we can talk about a progressive form of patriotism that we can all adopt.
OK. Rachel?
Yeah, I think in response to Evan's question, has Farage peaked too soon? The problem is that what Labour are not doing is actually responding to the issues which are driving people to reform. And that's the big disconnect.
Like what?
So like the fact that the cost of living crisis is getting so extreme that over 60% of people are struggling with financial on the week by week. Life is becoming a daily struggle for people so much, and they're so furious with the political class that just isn't listening to that, and so disillusioned with a Labour government that came in because they voted for change. They wanted a Labour government to stand on the side of working people, and instead they kind of continued with Conservative austerity in a different way. But what I'm interested in terms of what Sebastian said, because though I kind of agree that patriotism is in no way the terrain of the right, what I think is a tragedy is that this Labour government is being led by Reform. So they're constantly responding to Reform's suggestion of what should be on the narrative. And it's like, so now, let's not be squeamish about immigration. We could actually just have a more visionary approach to that. What Starmer hasn't done at this conference, I don't think, is actually got people excited about a vision. He's just kind of survived a catastrophe in terms of his personal reputation, but he's not actually made us go, I can see that's a solution. Let's move forward. We can make the society more equal. We can build a better Britain. You don't sort of feel that solution-focused vision, and I've never felt that from Labour. And I think until we feel that, Reform are just going to keep storming.
But when Zach Polanski was fighting for the leadership, I mean, he made it quite clear that he wanted to be a left-wing version of Nigel Farage and said effectively, I'm going to be the left-wing populist. So again, Farage is setting the agenda even in the Green Party.
Well, he's certainly not setting the policy agenda in the Green Party. And that's, I think, all Zach meant by that was that...
Nationalisation, he seems to be all in favour of that now.
What Zach meant by that very clearly was that, I mean, the Green Party's had the most popular policies for a very long time.
Has it?
Yeah.
Why aren't people voting for them?
But that's the thing is, they think we're a single issue party. We haven't really
they think you're
communicated.
cranks. That's the reason they don't vote for you.
It's all shifting in terms of cutting through with the narrative of what we're really about, and that we're about, you know, communities and nature. We're about a better quality of life for everybody, because the solutions to the climate crisis are the same as the solutions to the cost of living crisis. And really, we're about combating inequality, which is rampant in this country. Wild. We're one of the most unequal countries on this earth, and that doesn't get a mention at a Labour conference. Like, that's crazy to me. So no, what Zach meant definitely was we need more really direct communication. We need more also just chiming with what people are really feeling right now and meeting people where they're at. And you can see, I mean, you know, Zach's proving it in the last few weeks, hasn't he? He's cutting through.
Well, I think to an extent you're right. But Nigel Farage is proving it with spades because if you look at the top 10 issues that the general public are interested in and are concerned with, he is coming up with his answers. Now, everybody may disagree with them, but I mean, immigration, I suppose, is the key one. And you can say, well, he's put that at the top of the agenda, but he has actually got some ideas. Now, Seb, I think probably most of us would think that some of those ideas are fairly reprehensible, certainly on the indefinite leave to remain issue. Yeah. But to the general public out there, he's talking their language.
Yeah, but don't forget, there is also, you've got to remember where the money's coming from. And there's, like, say, on the net zero narrative, you've got billionaires in fossil fuel industries funding those narratives. They are literally funding the narratives. It doesn't bubble up from the people. It's literally the cash is kind of pumping through there. Actually,
you know that for a fact.
Well, I know they're backed by billionaires who are in the fossil fuels.
They have to declare. They have to, be a little bit careful because they do have to declare where all their donations come from, so we can see it. Tom Scottson.
No, I don't think they have peaked. And the reason I give that is that I spoke to a reform source straight after the general election, and they were incredibly disappointed, some of them. They said, we've only got 4 million votes, and UKIP in 2015, I got roughly the same that. Now, bear in mind, of course, Reform got more seats than UKIP. UKIP won 1, Reform won 5. But since then, they've soared in the polls. There was a More in Common poll that came out today. They're on 30% again. Another poll by Survation a couple of days on 34%. And I think that Morgan McSweeney is reportedly telling ministers and cabinet ministers that the main issues at the moment are growth and boats. And Labour aren't really fixing either of them. And Labour MPs, not just on the right, but also the soft left of the party, are becoming increasingly exasperated because they're not showing any economic growth. There's no real change in the dial. And immigration is simply, in their words, out of control. So if they can't sort those two issues, and Nigel Farage as well is an incredibly charismatic politician, he's really taking the zeitgeist now, and I just feel that if he continues this, if he continues to get the media narrative, then he is just going to become more popular, and he is odds on now to become Prime Minister.
Let's take a follow-up call from James in James, go ahead.
Oh, hello, Ian. Good evening. While it's abundantly clear that not all reform supporters are racists, isn't it also abundantly clear that the vast majority of racists support reform?
Oh, I'm so disappointed in you, James, because that's a version of the question that we heard in Brexit, isn't it? Sort of not all Brexit supporters are racist, but and so on. Jessica, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear that question. But in terms of what I was going to say before, one slight change, I accept it. It doesn't perhaps stem the tide of the reform. I accept the point about the polling, but there is some accountability now. You look at the fact that Reform are now running huge county councils, vast budgets for the first time ever. Probably with some of the councillors, they may not know that well yet. I hope they get to know them, and I hope they've vetted them all. But my point is there is some accountability for the first time for Farage on a level that will be tangible and measurable. In the end, whether that makes a difference to the electorate is a different question. But it's certainly one that I think the main political parties, the longer-standing political parties, need to carefully watch. Because instead of him just throwing the tomatoes from the side, he can for the first time, I think, be held to account budgets, roads, infrastructure, schools.
But what's depressing in going back to what we've been thinking about the communications of reform, so they've taken over Kent County Council, which is right next door to me. That's where you live.
That is where I live.
So, yeah.
Yes.
But what's fascinating is, obviously, I know from people on that council that at the beginning there was barely anyone turning up to meetings. It was just sort of utter chaos. There's nothing really going on. And then what you see in their communications are these incredible videos, sort of, the shot looking up and they're standing grandiosely on the staircase and we're here and we're sorting Kent out and we will make Kent great again. And the spin is absolutely incredible. I don't think you see other parties do that for their councils. Certainly the Green Party hasn't. We have to sort of find a version of that that's a bit less
What about James's question about racism and Reform Party supporters? And was Keir Starmer right to use that word? Because I think a lot of Reform... He says he was just talking about Nigel Farage, but I think a lot of Reform Party supporters were thinking that he was talking about them.
I think speaking to Labour MPs after Starmer made those comments, I think they regretted that. And mainly because many Labour MPs have told many members of the press how poor their comms have been since they came election. So why he would even use in an interview to try and wiggle that in didn't really seem to make sense. And there was ministers saying that they're going to leave conference now. They've had, a real holiday away from Parliament. They'll come back and they'll get questions from voters saying, why are you calling me a racist? And I think it's going to really keep dragging those voters who are, reform curious anyway in Labour and away from the party, and maybe even further Conservatives away to reform again.
Reform curious, I'm going to steal that one.
We have to be so clear about what Starmer said. He didn't call Farage a racist. He didn't call Reform voters racist. I think both of those things will be really dangerous places to go. The R word is very potent and you have to use it with care. But that policy is racist. This is talking about deporting people who live here legally, who are from the global south, many other places, crucially not Europe. He's excluded EU citizens or EU residents with settled status. Call it what it is. And I like this new punchier version of Starmer. And do you know what? I think it is closer to what he thinks. It is a more personal version of the Prime Minister.
What about calling the boats Farage boats? I mean, I thought that was just pathetic.
It's not entirely right. It's a bit playful, isn't it? But
no, it's not. It's just ridiculous.
Back to Jessica's point about holding Farage to account. The other big albatross he has around his neck is Brexit, and he has to own the fallout of that, whatever that may be.
He doesn't get challenged on that much at all.
I don't think he does.
To me. I think people just sort of let him get away with that.
Well, he would say, again, there's no Reform person on the panel, he would say, well, it's not our fault if the Conservatives sort of messed it up. Jessica.
I wasn't about at the time, so can't help with that one. But I agree that it features just so little in the debate with him in particular, and the absolutely central role that he played in that in that campaign. It just never hasn't landed, and that I imagine he knows and is part of his political skills going forward. And Tom's been setting out the figures for us on the polling. So he's probably quite happy to keep it there. I'm sure he'll take the point out of his back pocket and use it if he thinks it's going to be an advantage for him.
Right, we'll move on to some other issues in just a few moments' time with our panel. It's 19 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
temperatures.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
21 minutes past 8 on LBC. We have the Deputy Leader of the Green Party, Rachel Millward, with us. Sebastian Salek, Labour Councillor in Waltham Forest, former political journalist. Current political journalist, Tom Scottson with Politics Home. And Jessica Harrington, family law barrister, former Conservative MP. Callum in Gateshead is on the line. Callum, what's your question, please? Hello.
How are you doing? I hope you're all doing all right. My question is, I don't believe Keir Starmer is going to be the next leader in the next general election. I think the general election will be in 2028. So my logical thing is just, I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I think Angela Rayner will be the next leader of the Labour Party. I'm just wondering if you agree.
Well, that's an interesting suggestion. I think had she not resigned, I think possibly you might have a point. Sebastian, you're steeped in Labour. What's your view?
Next election probably in 2029, so we've got about 4 years. You cast the clock back 4 years, and Boris Johnson was talking about a decade in power. So a lot can change in that time. Keir Starmer had just lost the Hartlepool by-election, not far from Gateshead, and was thinking about resigning. And now he's the Prime Minister. So I wouldn't want to guess who's going to take us into the next election. I think it'll probably be Keir Starmer. But it's so far away, politics moves so quickly, couldn't possibly even begin to divine.
What was your view of what Andy Burnham's done over the last few days?
Oh, he's messed it up, hasn't he? He's messed it up. Do you know what? The biggest mistake he's made, and I say this as somebody who has no quarrel with Andy Burnham, I think he's really effective as the mayor of Manchester. But if you replace your leader now, you lose your mandate. And Nigel Farage will never stop saying, let's have a general election now. And that's the one thing he wants. We can't let him have it.
Tom?
I don't think Angela Rayner will be the next Prime Minister. I still think it's odds on Burnham. And I know that's controversial to say after the conference because it's been quite a poor one for the Greater Manchester Mayor. But it changed my mind when I was in the bar, I was talking to a journalist, and they said that when Keir Starmer comes up in focus groups, people just laugh. People just hysterically laugh and think that he's doing a poor job. Again, they talk about the main issues, immigration, schools, the economy. And I think that Andy Burnham did overplay his hand. I think there's no question about that. Even supporters you talk to and they think that he probably went too early. They were rowing back at conference. But I just think when next May comes and you've got the Welsh Senate elections, now Plaid and Reform are projected to come on top, or one of the two. And I think that if they're reduced to a rump in the Welsh Senate, and then people are going to be asking what. Well,
and in Scotland, of course, and the local elections. I mean, I think these local elections in May and the regional and mayoral ones are going to be the most fascinating ever, because you've got people saying, well, Camille Badenoch might not survive if she has terrible results, and she probably will. You've got that with Keir Starmer. I mean, if Reform come top in Scotland, which, I mean, there was a poll recently that said they would, which I find incredible. I mean, who knows what could be the consequence of that? Rachel?
I mean, I instinctively feel it's unlikely to be Starmer because he is so unpopular. And to me, it is this kind of really upsetting sort of lack of values and vision, which is such a kind of core part of what people are looking for in a leader. But, you know, you definitely can't predict the future. In terms of the polls, we're over the two-party system. We know that. That's kind of crumbling. Obviously, in the Green Party, we're sort of feeling at the beginning of a different fast track coming up the fast lane. It'll happen. But it's a much more... I mean, it's a shame we haven't got proportional representation, isn't it? Because it's a kind of system that lends itself to that. We've got
Nigel
5 parties
Farage
now.
thinks that too. So you do have something in common with him.
There we go.
Jessica.
Thank you. Well, I will say I think he's more likely to be than I think others around the panel. But what I think isn't that important, but what I found really interesting was Sebastian's answer as the Labour representative and councillor here on the panel, who was just very cautious in saying, you know, elections are a long way off, or, you know, we're not really sure. When if you look back at previous prime ministers, who would ever have thought a year after, say, Tony Blair won, you know, or Margaret Thatcher, well, actually, that's not a good example. And 1980 wasn't a great year for her. But my point is, at the start of Tony Blair years, you would never even have a conversation about whether or not he was going to be the leader. Different times, I accept all of that. But I think that this whole, you know, everything's thrown up in the air at the moment. I think I agree with what Rachel said earlier about what this What this conference for me has shown, the Labour conference, to me as an outsider, what it's shown to me is that it was a survival for leadership point. There was no vision, I agree, about the future. He wasn't going to achieve all of that. I think he is a man, Rachel said, not a person, Keir Starmer, of values and vision. I don't agree about values. I think he does have values, but I totally agree on the vision. And this country needs that absolutely now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll come back on that quickly. The only reason I erred was because I'm being asked to make a political prediction that's 4 years away. And I've done that before and I've messed it up royally. So be cautious to do that. What I will say is we're in a culture of shorter and shorter term lengths. You saw it throughout the Tories. And it's because people are desperate for change. People are hurting from way back to the financial crisis in 2008. So there's this desperation. Fortunately, we have that mandate. We have those 5 years to start to make those inroads and give back that money.
If you were a Starmer as the Prime Minister, I mean, that's who people voting last year would not expect the Labour Party to be in the internal crisis they are just a year and a bit later.
But it plays to the impatience of people. And I understand that impatience. People are hurting, but that change takes time. Anybody who says that we can turn the country around in a year or even 2 years is lying to you.
Oh, come on. But there has been a betrayal of values that I think, even I thought Starmer would show more values than he had, like to keep children in poverty unnecessarily, to threaten benefits of disabled people. These are things, to prop up a genocide in Gaza. These are things that we did not expect a Labour leader would do. And it is startling to experience these things. And people are desperate and they're not seeing someone respond to their desperation. They're not seeing someone really understand what the issues are and what needs to change. They're not seeing someone tackle the problem.
But these are the realities of governing. You can't do everything you want. Money isn't unlimited. And some of these things are changing. There is some rumbling around.
Such a Tory, Sebastian.
I know.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that.
It's just the reality. It's just the reality because we've had 14 years of Tories. We've been ground down.
You don't have to have the level of inequality that we've got, and it doesn't have to keep on growing. I think it really staggers me that people don't see that is a worsening and really extreme thing about this country, is that the super rich are getting richer and richer and richer and richer as they sleep, and everybody else, working classes and middle classes now, are struggling more and more and more. That's crazy, and that needs addressing, and it just doesn't get addressed.
But the crucial question is how, and I haven't seen a solution yet. I'm really of that ilk as well. I want people with the broadest shoulders to pay the most and to do their bit to help. But I just haven't seen a way to make that work.
I think this is a lesson for reform, though. I think a lot of Labour MPs thought it just required personnel change, that all we need to do is get rid of the Conservatives. They've been so poor in government and we come in. And in fact, government is really difficult. It is extremely difficult.
You're completely right.
I think that is a brilliant point, because there are so few cabinet ministers who I think really have a grip on their own departments and know how to pull the levers of power. Yeah. I mean, it's the same. Absolutely. I think all governments have suffered from this over the years. If the civil service make up their minds that they're going to frustrate a particular minister who shows any sign of weakness, they can do it. And I'm not having a go at civil servants here, because most of them are very, very high quality. But Angela Rayner, to come back to her, she knew how to get stuff done in her department. And I think she's going to be an absolutely massive loss. And I thought it was very interesting yesterday that West Streeting basically said we need her back and we need her back now. And what's your view on that, Sebastian?
I think she was a real loss as well. She was a fantastic communicator. She was very effective, as you say, in her department. I don't know quite what the route looks like to bring her back. It's going to take a bit of time, I think, just politically to be able to regain that capital. But she was a really valued member of that cabinet. And I think more than anything, and it's a point that's been made to death, she's just a normal person. There aren't enough of those people in politics, and someone who can just talk to the voters one-on-one and make a connection. They're pretty scarce, aren't they?
But I think that's why Callum, I don't think, gets it, because you say she's just a normal person. I mean, most politicians are, actually. I mean, Jessica, you would not have liked to have been described as anything but a normal person,
That's
I don't
correct.
think. But she did something that normal people don't do. And I think that's always going to be the difficulty for bringing her back.
It may well be. It may well be. As I say, I think the route isn't clear. But I'd like to see more people have those honest conversations and speak more plainly. And I think we've seen that from conference. You've had Starmer, certainly. You've had Wes Streeting. You've had a lot of other very senior politicians shooting from the hip. And Downing Street going back and looking over, how do we come back from there? How do we respond to this? And That is all honesty. That is realism. And I think we need a bit more of that in politics.
Well, some great discussion here. We've got another half an hour on some various other subjects. Rachel, I think you're going to like the next one. It's 8:30, though. Let's get the news headlines first with Dominic Ellis.
The head of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has apologised for what he's called the reprehensible behaviour of some of his officers. Allegations of racism, misogyny and excessive force at Charing Cross Police Station in London are being investigated. Ministers are welcoming a ruling that found a company linked to Tory peer Baroness Mone breached a pandemic contract. PPE MedPro has been ordered to repay more than £120 million by a High Court judge. And Jane Goodall, considered one of the world's leading experts on chimpanzees, has died at the age of 91. She revolutionised our understanding of primate behaviour and won the trust of the free-living chimps she studied in Africa. LBC weather, a dry evening for many, rain lingering in northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, lows of 6 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
We're going to be asking whether Tony Blair and Donald Trump are the right men to bring peace to Gaza. You can listen now by using our free Global Player app.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
8:33. Let me reintroduce my panel too. If you've just joined us, Sebastian Salek is a Labour councillor in Waltham Forest, Jessica Harrington, family law barrister, former Conservative MP, political journalist Tom Scottson from the Politics Home website, and Rachel Millward, deputy leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. Rachel, there is another deputy leader of the Green Party, a very controversial man. Are you happy to be serving in this capacity alongside him, but bearing in mind some of the absolutely disgusting things he's said in the past?
I'm very happy to be serving alongside Martin. He is somebody who stands with his community. He was out there in the Hare Hill riots, sort of helping people on all sides and actually sort of literally putting fires out. So he represents his community in Leeds and stands with people around the world. So I think what you're... Do you want to say what you're referring to?
No, you say it. Put it in your own words.
So what I think you're referring to is that he basically used, I think, some very misguided language when talking about a rabbi who was recruiting people to the Israeli IDF to pretty much join in the genocidal activity in Gaza. Now, Martin is somebody who is a Muslim man, and he stands up for his community and is actually the subject of racist attacks very often himself and his family. He has apologised for the language. It was definitely inappropriate in my seeking. But
I've seen a video that he recorded the day after October the 7th. I can't really repeat what he said on that here. I mean, it was pretty horrible stuff.
My view of what happened on October the 7th is that it's unspeakably horrendous, and the level of violence and suffering that none of us want to contemplate, let alone know that people experienced. And absolutely, that's unequivocal. But I do think that there has, even the Labour Party have now voted to say that members are agreeing that there is a genocide in Gaza, and the United Nations have also confirmed that to be the way.
Fine.
But
we might have a
early.
question on that later. Final question on it, because I'm just using my prerogative to ask you this.
Yes, fair enough.
But what does it say about the Green Party that they can vote for someone like that to be deputy leader?
Again, I think what's difficult is that you're picking on a particular incident, a particular moment, a particular thing that was said in a heated way. I think that Martin has been campaigning against this genocide for much longer than other people have, for well before it was called out as such. And he's a Muslim man. I'm really proud that we have a Jewish leader, a Muslim deputy, and me. We didn't stand on a joint ticket. We got elected separately. We're getting to know each other. But I actually think that it's amazing that the Green Party can represent all those different communities, and that we do, and that we speak to the...
And you left out the gays.
I didn't leave out the gays. I just didn't talk about people's sexuality. Do we need to do that right now? I mean, Zach is rightfully proud to be one of the first political leaders who's gay.
Let's go to Martin in Doncaster. Hello, Martin.
Hi, Ian and panel. Yeah, and the question is with energy bills going up again today, is it for the birds? Labour's pledged to cut energy bills by £300 a year.
So is that for the birds? And let's also include in this, is making a move to ban fracking permanently really going to help? That's what Ed Miliband has said today that he wants to do. I must admit, I thought fracking had already been banned, but there we go. Rachel, come on, let's start with you.
Well, like you say, fracking, there was already a moratorium on fracking, so it's not quite as radical as it sounds. Fracking is appalling and communities hate it, and we all hate it, and it's really good that that's going to be permanently banned, if that's a slight difference of terminology or whatever. But the real issue is that, Ed Miliband is kind of doing one thing with his left hand and one thing with his right hand, because he's also talking about reopening, like having contracts with North Sea oil and gas and getting drilling again, which is a change for the negative. And that's absolutely not what we need to be doing for the security of future generations.
Well, if you want to get bills down, you will do that, won't you?
If you want to get bills down, you'll be investing in renewables and reaching net zero as fast as you possibly can, which the Climate Change Committee have now confirmed is much cheaper than they thought it was going to be. It would only cost 0.2% of GDP to do that.
If only we had 0.2% of GDP to play with.
Well, do you know, maybe we should actually think about the people who should pay for that as being these mass corporate polluters and the super rich who create most of the pollution anyway. But, there are ways of doing that. And I think that what we need is a proactive investment in our future. If we bring more renewables, it's secure energy, it's homegrown, there's loads more jobs, millions of jobs. That's a really sort of exciting vision of the future, that. And it brings bills down whilst not reducing, much less carbon emissions. It's a win-win-win.
Tom Scottson.
Yeah, I was surprised as you, Ian. I thought it had been banned before, and then Ed Miliband made the speech. But I kind of looked through a different lens, and I thought it was perfect red meat for the Labour base, that they hate fracking more than the general population. It is an unpopular policy, but it was a really good wedge issue for Ed Miliband to divide between Reform and Labour. So instead of obviously accusing them of racism, which many cabinet ministers had done over the conference, he thought, right, I'm going to go for a big environmental issue, try and peel off maybe some of that Green vote that Labour had lost. And maybe I saw it as a subtle leadership pitch as well. Ed Miliband, some people fancy his chances again, and they see him as popular with the base. He is the most popular cabinet minister with Labour members.
Actually, that is true, isn't it? Labour lists do that survey every month. Yeah, I was quite surprised at that.
And he's continuously top. And I think it's probably one of those things that, obviously, of course, he'd lost the 2015 election, and they probably hark back and think, he'd have been a much better leader than Keir Starmer. But it's very different being an energy secretary to being Prime Minister.
OK. Jessica.
I think it is for the birds to try and get the bills down. I don't see a coherent plan at all from Labour about this. I think there's also, we've got to have this ongoing disconnect between this sort of idea, and as you say, and Ed Miliband throwing in the fracking point at conference, and then actually reality when factories in this country are paying twice as much than factories in Germany or France for their energy. Our manufacturing base is doomed potentially. And that is what worries me. and I just think that I don't see how they're going to get the bills down. I don't see the building blocks, literally, but also in terms of getting businesses and homes and individuals and families to a place where they need to be. It just doesn't send out the right message in terms of reassurance to business when they're going to make these promises on bills, and I don't know how they're going to follow them through.
You're almost preempting our next question there.
Oh,
so
I'll keep
good link.
Yeah.
Sebastian.
This comes back to this idea of short-term pain, long-term gain. And I know the short-term pain is still pain. We shouldn't play that down at all. But the big Miliband policy, Great British Energy, it's about pretty much what Rachel's talking about. It's renewable energy. It is energy that is cheap to produce, that is produced domestically. And once we get there, it's going to be fantastic. What we should also say is that some places bills are already coming down. Part of GB Energy is putting solar panels on the roofs of schools and of hospitals, and that is bringing bills down for all those buildings. So there are the short-term wins as well.
But why is he doing oil and gas then? I mean, great, but you totally contradicting yourself.
No, not at all. It's political realism, isn't it? You can't just turn off oil and gas overnight, because never mind about bills. The most important thing, if you're Energy Secretary, is keeping the lights on. We need to make sure we have the supply domestically to be able to supply the homes, the schools, the businesses that we need to do, but then play the long game, get that infrastructure in place to be able to generate that fantastic, cheap, green energy.
Right, let's move on to the next question. It's from Andrew in Fulham. Today, the Institute of Directors released its latest business confidence survey of UK business leaders, which indicated that business confidence is at its lowest level since the survey began in July 2016. However, the government keeps telling us that UK business confidence is really high. Who should we believe? Jessica.
I would go with the business community. I would say this is one of the hugest challenges and concerns that I have about the Labour government. I think the rise, I think the tax implications that there've been on businesses in the last year. I think the forthcoming budget. We need that business confidence. We want to say that Britain is open for business. We want people to invest here. We want people to stay here. We talk about taxing the very, very rich. We've also got, I would say, droves of people who are now leaving the countries. They're not giving any tax in at all. And these are people, some of those people run businesses and they employ lots of people. And it does concern me. Business confidence is so important. Now, there have been some positives. I think some of the agreements that have been reached with other countries and so on, but it's really a drop in the ocean. I think that the commitment to, say, the industrial strategy, and I'll just say now that somebody very close to me, my husband, designed for Jeremy Hunt or came up with the advice about an industrial strategy. So I don't want to say that this has come from nowhere, but it's something that the Labour government have taken on and they say they're going to adopt. But within that, this country, we have so many strengths to start. We sort of start 30 love up in a tennis game. People love the fact that our rule of law is strong, it's independent here. They like the English language, our history in terms of the business community and what we've done over the centuries. So you start from a strong base, but then when it comes to actually getting results, getting answers, and then being whacked with big taxes, that's my worry. And that stops businesses staying here or indeed investing here. And we must make sure that improves.
Tom.
I think Number 10 will be worried about this. That, again, their central message before the election was growing the economy and economic growth. But at the same time, Labour MPs are slightly perplexed because obviously they brought in the Employment Rights Bill, which is obviously a huge part of legislation, and the National Insurance Rise. Now, whatever the merits of those policies, they aren't really exactly economic growth policies with them in mind. And I think that some people are now thinking that we've got to make the trade-off of, are we going to go down more the employment rights lane, or are we going to grow the economy and try and peel those votes that are more business savvy, those are more pro-business? And it will worry because, again, the economy usually is the biggest issue at a general election. And if they can only show anemic growth when you've got reform on their tails, and even the Conservative Party had a rump, they're going to find it very difficult to convince the public that they have achieved their central message.
Rachel, is the Green Party actually in favour of growth? Because and I don't mean that facetiously, because there are Green parties in Europe that actually think no, growth is not a good idea.
Well, you can't have. The line which you often hear said is you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. Like, there is an infinite resource to grow. But it sort of depends what you mean by growth. Because if you think of growth as being everybody thriving, standard of living's improving, that's, again, more about an evening out. So it helps everybody in an economy if we don't have the radical inequality that I keep talking about this session. But that helps everybody, because even if you're really very wealthy, you still want public services to be running brilliantly. You still want your employees to be healthy and well and have, a good standard of living. It helps the whole thing. So I think in terms of everybody thriving, that's probably more of a green aim than sort of GDP as a measure of growth. I think that we see that as being quite artificial. It's better to look at people's well-being. It's better to look at the kind of health of everybody in the economy. That's what matters ultimately, isn't it?
How would green policies improve business confidence?
That's a good question. I was going to say that as a council leader, so I'm from a rural Sussex that there's loads of small and medium-sized enterprises, a staggering amount actually, really quite innovative businesses. And I would say they have been really, really badly hit by the national insurance type legislation. I think that's really difficult. And then on the other scale, you have big tech, where we're kind of seeing just things coming over from America and taking over here. I don't think we're sort of investing in our homegrown resources enough. So yeah, it all comes back to a healthy, well-being based economy.
Okay. Sebastian.
I follow these surveys quite closely, and it's really odd that you get really, really positive ones and really, really negative ones often at the same time. And I don't know what's going on with the methodology, but I used to be a business journalist, and the motto we always ran by was follow the money. And so I look at the £150 billion that just 1 week ago, a raft of US businesses committed to the UK. We're talking Microsoft, we're talking OpenAI, we're talking Nvidia. Real giants are choosing our island to invest, and that is a really positive thing.
Well, only if it would be better to invest in our own talent, wouldn't it? And have
They're
some
creating thousands of jobs.
Yeah, let's do that homegrown as well. Otherwise, we're just out the back. I mean, look, you've got a situation where Elon Musk is calling for the bringing down of Parliament, and feeding the far right, totally
Which is
undermining
awful,
your government.
but don't conflate that with business leaders who want to invest and create jobs in this country. We desperately needed jobs in this country.
I'm just raising a question that
Sure.
if we allow these kind of giant tech companies to come and dominate here, and then we know from Elon Musk that there's real political involvement and high risk politically, that should make us feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Well, let me take a leaf out of Keir Starmer's book and wave the flag, because we have the third biggest fintech and AI industry in the world, behind the US and China, and we've created that ourselves. So we've kind of done what you would want us to do. So I think that is a real achievement, and that's the future. I can't remember if I've got this right, but I think I have. In that the amount of investment that we have in those sectors in this country is bigger than the whole of the rest of the EU put together. Now that is some achievement, I think. I could add, and wouldn't have happened without Brexit, but I won't. It's 8:48.
This is LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
10 to 9 on LBC. We have a cracking fun question for the end. They all love it. I've told them what it is. Robin is in Whitehaven. Hello, Robin.
Hello, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Well, the question that I've got, and first of all, I'd like to say I totally condemn the October the 7th and any terrorism in any form. So, I don't want to be labelled as a pro-Hamas. But my question is the peace document basically a document calling for surrender? And was it designed for it to be rejected by Hamas? That's my question. Is it a document asking for surrender, just the way the things that I've heard that's in it and things like that? And I think Netanyahu at some point said there'll never be a two-state solution. So I'm just wondering if the panel think it's designed to be rejected.
Right. Thank you very much. Well, we did have a caller earlier in the show who was suggesting something very similar. I told him not to be so cynical, but hey, Sebastian.
I really hope not. We can never know. None of us live in the president's head. I think every step that has to be made here follows one aim, and that is, do we reach that two-step solution? If we don't think we can get there, we shouldn't be going down that route. It seems like we finally have a breakthrough. I think what is positive here, Trump is a man who responds well to incentives. And there is a Nobel Peace Prize dangling above his head. And if that's what it takes for peace in the Middle East, let's give it to him.
Okay. All right. Rachel, I'm not sure you'd agree with that.
No, we desperately want peace in Gaza and would give anything a chance that could work. I'm afraid, I have to say, I think Robin's really onto something here, because we all know, don't we, from peace settlements that have worked more, Northern Ireland, whatever, that you need to get both warring parties in the room to decide what's in that treaty.
You think Hamas should be in the room?
I think that it doesn't matter how abysmal people are. Well, let's think about it from the perspective of the Palestinian people. So Palestinian people are being asked to accept, I think it is, total surrender in order to then start receiving aid they should be receiving anyway, in order for the genocide to stop, which it shouldn't be happening anyway. So we're in a situation, it's actually extraordinary if you back off it a bit and think about it, where it's almost condoning the lack of aid, the treatment of the Palestinian people, and saying we will only abide by international law if you do these things. That's a terrible starting point. But the other thing is, these people in Palestine these Palestinian people are traumatized. They have been going through a horrific, just unspeakable time. And they're asked to accept basically a colonial temporary state that's coming in, a colonial force coming in to take control of their place. It won't have freedom of movement. It will be, policed by an authority that has no Palestinian representatives in it. Do you think that's going to have the buy-in of the Palestinian people?
Why do you think, then, that all of the states surrounding Israel and Gaza have supported this document?
Because they're desperate for it to end. Everybody just wants this to end. I want this to end. What I'm saying is, and I wish it wasn't the case, this is set up to fail, and this is not going to work.
Jessica?
I don't agree with Rachel, and I don't see it as a surrender document in this way. I think it needs to be worked with. I think it should be welcomed. We're approaching the anniversary of 7th of October. Is just upon us. It's Yom Kippur tomorrow, and so on. I would not accept that it was always intended for Hamas to reject it. I do think that's too cynical. I'm disappointed if it doesn't make progress.
Tom?
So I've been to Israel recently, and I was there at the Nova Festival Memorial, and it's probably one of the most emotional things I've ever done, very close to tears. And I was also at the LFI reception yesterday, and it's also hearing some of the survivors.
Labour Friends of Israel.
Labour Friends of Israel, yeah, I should add. And that, I guess, on your point there about the freedom of movement element, we've seen that what happened on October the 7th, when there was movement across the border, and it was, the worst atrocity of this century, and that, I guess, speaking to Israeli sources and people that are very well connected with this issue, I think that they were incredibly confident this could go over the line. But it seems that the only kind of negotiator that is rejecting it is Hamas. And I think that what is forgotten.
They haven't quite said that yet, but it does seem to be edging in that direction.
And I think that what is forgotten in this conflict a lot of the time is there are two sides. It's not just Israel, it is also Hamas.
So they need to both be in the room. However, for it to sustain as a peace solution, they need to both, form that together.
But isn't that the
That's
second
how it
stage of
works.
this, where you hopefully solve the situation in Gaza where there's no more fighting and that people aren't forced to leave? And I mean, that was part of one of the points in the peace plan. And then after, 6 months, a year, when things are clearly settled down, that's when you move to the proper peace process where you bring the Palestinians.
It's not how it's
into the
worked in
room.
other places when it's worked.
Well,
And I
nothing's
think
ever the same, is it?
Something that's quite extraordinary is that this is happening outside of UN structures. It's not the norm.
When has the
normal.
UN ever contributed anything to these sorts of things?
I think that's deeply cynical.
Well, it's not deeply
But I think
cynical
we're in a
because
new-
the UN have been completely irrelevant in most of these major conflicts in the world over the last 20 or 30 years. But that could be a whole programme, which we probably don't want to get into. I do have one last question before we get to the fun question, so let's move on to that. It's from Don in Broadstairs. Should Baroness Mone be stripped of her peerage? Now, to recap, a company linked to the peer, well, it's more than linked, called PPE Medro, has been told to repay £122 million to the government for medical gowns which it was contracted to supply during COVID. The PPE has been in storage since then because the company could not prove it had been sterilised correctly. Now, PPE Medro was set up by a consortium led by Baroness Mone's husband, Doug Barrowman. Jessica?
Well, I think she should do the right thing and resign from the House of Lords. I don't see that coming, unfortunately, because the surname Mone, if you put Mone, M-O-A-N, what I saw when she gave some interviews with the press a few months ago was just moan after moan from her about how terrible it all was and how badly she felt she was being treated. It appears, I haven't read the whole judgment, but that a High Court judge takes a very different view to that.
That is very true.
And, I think now should be some sense of responsibility and humility at this point. So whether somebody's stripped of their peerage, I'm sure there is a process for that. But that would be my view. Sorry.
Brief answers, please, on this, Sebastian.
Yeah, I mean, I think during COVID we saw some of the best of the British people, and sadly this was among the worst. But if you start the process of stripping people off their peerages, where does that end? I think it's a slippery slope. I agree with Jessica. I'd like to see her do the decent thing and resign.
Tom?
I don't think she's likely to come back to the House of Lords. I think that it's a pretty bipartisan issue here, but it's just relitigating any of COVID. I mean, as long as it just goes away again and I don't have to think about any of that.
Well, I think sadly we're unlikely to see any of the 122 million, given the company only has, I think, under $750,000 in net assets. Rachel?
Yeah, it's depressing, isn't it? No, she should go. She should obviously do the decent thing.
Right, our fun question from James in Clapham. Hundreds of thousands of American government workers will now have to sit at home and do nothing until the new government shutdown ends. If you were told to not go to work and just sit at home and do nothing, what would you be doing to fill the hours? I can think of so many things. Luckily, I don't have to answer it, though. Tom?
There's a couple of things. One is that I'd like to get back playing piano again. I used to be a piano tutor before I became a journalist, and I'd love to bring that back, whether it be online or people. And also I'd like to help volunteer. For the football club I support, Altrincham FC, they're a non-league team. They run on volunteers mainly, and I feel that I'd be doing my civic duty if I did that.
Rachel?
My mind immediately went to photo albums because I sort of have this nostalgic memory of being like probably sort of in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah, you might have to explain to the under 30s what a photo album is.
So it's a large book. You see our
Not that I'm
images.
suggesting you're over 30, you understand.
Yeah, sure. I just used to get so much pleasure out of putting some music on and like reliving my holiday, all these cool experiences by making this lovely photo album. And then I've still got them. I still look at them, but they stopped completely in 2006 as soon as I went digital. So I have this fantasy, and it's never happened at all, that I will, on one of those days off, sit and do it. And of course, I never do.
Jessica?
Well, the two things that I've always promised myself I'd do if, heaven forbid, we have another COVID or a lockdown, is I really want to learn to fly, and I'd love to learn to sing. So we're on another
sure
musical.
that's compatible
now,
with a
I was going to say, well, one of those is much more compatible, being stuck in my house, to the other. So I'm going to go for finally learning to sing.
There were 2 weeks of COVID where I sat in silence next to my partner and we both did the most addictive thing you can ever do, researching your family history. And I'd do the other side.
Wondered where that was going for a moment there. Thank you all very much indeed. Some great debuts from the three of you. You will all be invited back, I promise. Next week's Cross Question, well, on the Monday and Tuesday, it'll come live from Manchester from the Conservative Party conference. I don't think we mentioned the word Conservative apart from introducing you, Jessica. I think Keir Starmer only mentioned it once in his speech. Right, coming up in a moment, we are going to turn our attention to junk food because the ban on bog-offs, buy one, get one free, for unhealthy food has come in today. I want to get your reaction to this, and I wonder how it'll affect your household budget, because if you want to address the cost of living crisis for poorer families, I would have thought the last thing you would want to do is to make their weekly food shop more expensive. Sure, we should all be encouraging everyone to eat more healthy food and not to buy food that is sort of less healthy. But do we really need the government to tell us what to do here? I'm not going to say it's the nanny state gone mad, but it is, isn't it?
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, the head of the Met Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has apologised for what he's called the reprehensible behaviour of some of his officers. An investigation's been opened into the behaviour of 11 people working out of Charing Cross Police Station in London. Allegations of excessive use of force and misogyny are being looked into. LBC's Fraser Knight says it's not the first time the police station's been highlighted.
This police station has been under the spotlight before. A report in 2022 found disgraceful behaviour among the ranks here, including a homophobic, racist and misogynistic WhatsApp group. And over the past few weeks, there have been more allegations against more members of staff.
Sir Mark Rowley will be speaking with LBC's Nick Ferrari at breakfast from 7 a.m. tomorrow. The Chancellor says she welcomes today's ruling ordering a company linked to Tory peer Baroness Mone to repay millions to the government. A judge has ruled PPE MedPro supplied protective gowns to the NHS during the pandemic which weren't